There were many plantations in the hill country of West Georgia, but only one was whispered about in churchyards, markets, and along dusty roads, as though it had been touched by something darker than history itself. Stonewater. A place where work never ended, where cries fell into the pine woods and rose back as echoes that stayed too long to be natural. But Stonewater's greatest story did not come from a ghost or a curse. It came from a girl. Her name was Ilara, born to a quiet mother named Ruth, a woman who seemed to carry entire worlds behind her eyes. She was gentle, graceful, the kind whose presence softened even the hardest days. Everyone on Stonewater said the same thing. Ruth never raised her voice, even when others might have had every right to, and because of that gentleness, she became a target. The master, Bartholomew Crane, demanded absolute obedience. When he felt disrespected, he punished not with purpose, but with pride. One late autumn afternoon, in front of half the field hands, he struck Ruth down for moving too slowly after an injury she had hidden for days. She collapsed and did not rise. Ilara was 15 when she watched her mother's legs buckle beneath her, and that moment did not break her. It forged her. No one knew what the girl whispered to her mother as she knelt beside her. No one heard the vow. But the workers who stood nearby would never forget her eyes. Something in them had shifted, like embers deciding they would not go out quietly. What followed over the next 2 years would be spoken of in murmurs for generations. A reckoning, a quiet, steady unraveling of Stonewater's power, not through brute force, but through precision, intelligence, planning, and a patience that frightened even those who admired her. This is the story of the girl who would not let injustice pass into silence, and the woman she became when justice finally came calling. The day the world changed for Ilara began with a sky that looked too bright for what was coming. A strange stillness hung over the plantation, the sort that made the workers trade glances because they all felt the same thing, a warning in the air. Ilara had been gathering kindling near the yard when she heard the commotion boots, a snapped command. Ruth's sharp breath pulled in too fast. She turned in time to see her mother flinch as the master towered over her. Ruth had stumbled earlier that morning, twisting her ankle, but she had not complained. She never did. Ilara knew her mother's small signs of pain, the tiny crease between her brows, the quiet wince when she thought no one noticed, but she worked anyway, determined not to give the overseers an excuse to look her way. But Crane noticed. "What's this?" he barked, pointing at the unfinished bundle of cotton near Ruth's feet. "Lazy again?" Ruth bowed her head. "Sir, I'm working. Only nothing." Ilara felt her breath catch. She stepped forward without realizing it, instincts pulling her toward her mother like gravity. But a hand gripped her wrist, old Miriam, the seamstress, shaking her head at her fiercely. "Don't you move, child," Miriam whispered. "Not now." Not him. Ilara froze, every muscle trembling. Crane circled Ruth with slow, deliberate steps. He liked an audience. He liked power. Everyone could see the moment he decided he would make an example of her, not for what she did, but because he felt like reminding everyone he could. When Ruth faltered and fell, the sound she made was small, too small, a sound Ilara would carry for the rest of her life. Ilara broke free of Miriam's grip and ran to her mother anyway, dropping to her knees, arms curled protectively around her. Ruth tried to speak, but her breath trembled, thin and short. "It's all right," Ilara whispered, voice raw. "I'm here. I'm right here." But it wasn't all right, and everyone around them knew it. Crane stared down at the pair, annoyed rather than moved. "Get her on her feet. She can work once she stops pretending." No one dared defy him, but no one stepped forward to obey either. They stood, silent and still, their pity sharp but useless. Ilara looked up at him, something new and dangerous rising inside her. She did not yell, did not cry, did not beg. She only stared, her face steady, and Crane, for the briefest instant, shifted his weight, as if something in her eyes unsettled him. He turned and walked away, muttering about soft-hearted fools. The moment he disappeared inside the manor, the workers rushed forward, gently lifting Ruth. Her legs were too weak, her breaths too shallow. "Ilara," Ruth whispered. barely audible. "Listen to me, baby." Ilara leaned closer, but her mother's words dissolved into coughs. That evening, the doctor came. He checked Ruth quickly, dismissively. "She'll heal," he said, though his tone betrayed doubt. "If she rests." But Stonewater did not allow rest. When the doctor left, Ilara remained beside her mother, holding her hand until night swallowed the cabin. There, in the quiet, she felt something settle inside her, not anger alone, but clarity, purpose. Ruth had always taught her gentleness, patience, forgiveness, but some things were too wrong to accept quietly. Ilara stared into the darkness, unblinking, her mother's hand still in hers. Stonewater had taken something from her, and she would take something back. Not immediately, not recklessly, but certainly. And when the time came, the skies over Stonewater would not be still, they would be witnesses. Night fell on the plantation like a held breath, silent, heavy, waiting to snap. Ilara sat in the shadowed corner of the slave quarters, her hands shaking despite the summer heat. Her mother lay on a straw pallet in the dim light, breathing in short, pained gasps. Every sound she made sliced through Ilara like a blade. The beating had been merciless. The overseer's rage had been directionless. Her mother had simply been near the wrong doorway at the wrong hour. Ilara had seen many horrors in her 18 years, but nothing carved itself into her memory like the sight of her mother crumpling beneath blows meant to break bone and spirit alike. Not when she was 8 and saw a man whipped. Not when she was 12 and watched a girl dragged to the fields before sunrise. Not even the nights when the screams of others woke her before dawn. But this was different, because her mother had always been the strong one, the one who held things together with worn hands and soft words, the one who taught her how to braid hair, how to hide fear behind a steady gaze, how to keep dignity tucked into the quiet spaces no master could reach. And now she couldn't even stand. "Ilara," her mother whispered, her voice a ghost of itself. "Don't let them turn your heart to stone." Ilara leaned close, swallowing the burning rise in her throat. "I'm right here, and you're going to be all right." Her mother smiled, a tiny, tired thing, but still hers. "Child, I've lived too long not to know the truth." Ilara shook her head sharply. "Save your breath." But her mother wasn't finished. "You've got to stay alive. Promise me that." Ilara hesitated. She had promised many things in her life: obedience, silence, survival. None had mattered much. None had ever felt like this. "I promise," she whispered. Her mother exhaled shakily, the kind of exhale people gave when the only thing holding them upright was love and will. "Good, because you were born with a spark, Ilara. And sparks catch fire." Ilara looked down at her hands. They were small, calloused, seemingly powerless, but inside them trembled a storm building by the minute. The quarters were quiet except for the rustle of bodies settling in, trying to find sleep despite pain, hunger, and hopelessness. A single lantern flickered in the corner, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Ilara's eyes stayed open long after others drifted away. She replayed the beating in her mind, every strike, every cry, every moment she was forced to stand still. The helplessness was worse than the fear, worse than the anger. It was a suffocating void that swallowed speech, movement, breath, and somewhere deep in that void, something else stirred. She didn't notice the older woman, Aunt Jo, watching her from across the room until she stepped closer. Aunt Jo had been on the plantation longer than anyone, a woman with 1,000 stories and a gaze sharp as broken glass. "You're burning up inside," she murmured, not unkindly. Ilara looked away. "I'm fine." "No, child, you ain't." Aunt Jo lowered herself with a wince. "You think you're hiding it, but grief don't sit quiet. It rattles the bones." Ilara's jaw tightened. They shouldn't have touched her. No, they shouldn't have. Aunt Jo leaned back, eyes narrowing. "But they did. And you're thinking on what comes next." Ilara didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Aunt Jo nodded slowly. "Your mama wouldn't want you rushing into something you can't come back from. She wouldn't want to be lying like this either," Ilara said quietly. Aunt Jo's mouth twitched, not quite a frown, not quite agreement, just Weigh your steps. Don't let rage make you forget your road. But Alara already felt the road beneath her feet, dark, dangerous, lined with choices that would change her life forever. Her mother's breath hitched in the silence behind her, small and weak, a reminder of every injustice carved into her flesh. The sound of footsteps outside snapped Alara's head up. The overseer's voice barked orders, distant but recognizable. Her pulse surged. Every instinct inside her wanted to run to the window, to see his face, to memorize it the way she had memorized the sun, the sky, the feel of her mother's hand in hers. Aunt Jo put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Don't look out there. Look in here." She tapped Alara's chest, "where the real decisions get made." Alara tore her gaze from the shadows outside and looked toward her mother again. A slow calm settled over her, not soft, not gentle, but cold and purposeful. Her grief was changing shape, turning into something with edges. She leaned forward and brushed her mother's hand. "I'm going to keep you safe," she whispered. And though her mother's eyes were closed, Alara felt something shift her own heartbeat, the air around her, the future itself tightening like a drawn bow. She had made a promise. And now there was only one question left. Who would she become to keep it? By mid-morning, the plantation had settled into a brittle calm. The fields gleamed under the relentless sun, rows of cotton swaying like fragile hands in surrender. Yet beneath that calm, tension hummed through the air. Every slave knew, without saying a word, that the last beating had ignited more than bruised flesh. It had kindled something far more dangerous, unyielding resolve. Lydia moved among the workers with practiced care, her hands carrying baskets of cotton, her eyes scanning for the overseers. Each step was measured, each glance deliberate. She had learned to read the smallest shifts in posture, the tiniest twitch of an eyebrow. The master's cruelty had not only wounded her body, it had sharpened her senses, honed a mind that now saw opportunity where others saw danger. In the shade of the old oak near the water trough, she whispered to a few trusted women. "Tonight," she murmured, "we strike." Their eyes widened, reflecting a mix of fear and awe. The fire of vengeance she carried was contagious, yet tempered with precision. This was not the reckless anger of youth. This was the calculated resolve of someone who had watched and waited, who had memorized every corridor, every creaking stair, every weakness in the master's armor. The afternoon passed slowly, the sun burning down in waves that seemed to mock their quiet plotting. Lydia's hands itched for action, for the swift justice that had danced in her mind for nights on end. She moved closer to the kitchen, where she had noticed the masters storing flammable oils. The scent of lard and simmering stew masked the acrid tang of kerosene, an advantage she would not waste. She touched a jar with a gloved hand, feeling the cool, slippery surface, imagining how it would spill across the hallways, how it could turn the master's own arrogance against him. As the evening approached, Lydia gathered a small group near the back quarters. There was Esther, with her steady hands and unmatched courage, and Marian, who could move like a shadow through the trees. Together, they checked supplies, rope cut to precise lengths, rags to absorb oil, and simple tools scavenged from the barn. Every detail had been rehearsed silently, every potential slip anticipated. They were ready. Though no one spoke of what ready truly meant, they all knew the stakes. By dusk, the estate was bathed in gold, the long shadows stretching like fingers across the fields. The overseers began their rounds, and the masters appeared on the veranda, laughing and oblivious, believing the day's labors had tamed their workers into submission once again. Lydia and her allies melted into the shadows, following routes they had walked countless times in secret, unseen but seeing all. It began with the smallest spark, a discarded oil rag dropped near the front hall. Flames licked upward, catching the edge of a tapestry. The smell of smoke was immediate, but so was the panic. The masters shouted, calling for buckets, for help, for the absurd notion that they could contain what they had fostered. Lydia watched from the shadows, heart steady, eyes unwavering. This was more than fire, it was a signal, a proclamation that cruelty had a price, that terror would be met with precision and reckoning. As the first floor began to blaze, Lydia slipped through a side door, her group following silently, moving toward the quarters where the master's own sons played. The plan was exact, the timing perfect, and each step had been memorized. Every floorboard groaned under their careful weight, every doorknob turned with calculated pressure. And in the center of the chaos, Lydia felt a strange sense of clarity. The fear that had once shackled her had been replaced with a cold, unwavering focus. This was no longer about escape, or even survival. It was about rewriting the rules of the estate, reclaiming power in a place that had long denied it. Smoke curled in ribbons around the gables, and the first screams pierced the night. Yet Lydia moved on, unhindered, eyes sharp, mind sharper. Tonight, the plantation would remember her, and the reckoning she delivered would be long remembered, not as the chaos of a frightened girl, but as the calculated, unflinching vengeance of a mother whose wrath had been honed by years of injustice. By the time the night fell fully, and the first embers glowed against the dark, Lydia stood silent, surveying the beginnings of ruin. She had struck, and the estate, once a symbol of unchecked cruelty, now bore the mark of its own reckoning. She felt no joy in the flames, only the satisfaction of purpose fulfilled, of a promise kept, and the unshakable knowledge that her justice had begun. The night had swallowed the plantation whole, leaving only whispers and smoke where order had once reigned. Lydia moved among the shadows, her senses stretched to their limits, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The fire still crackled in the distance, but her focus was no longer on flames, it was on the lives intertwined with the estate, those she had sworn to protect, and those who had earned the weight of their reckoning. She paused at the edge of the barn, where the smaller buildings crouched under the weight of darkness. Inside, she could hear the restless mutter of frightened men, the hurried clanging of tools as they attempted to respond to the chaos. Lydia's lips curled in a faint, controlled smile. Every moment had been planned with precision, and the panic she sensed was proof that control had shifted, if only for a few hours, to those who had long been denied it. Esther and Marian emerged silently from the rear of the main house, carrying bundles of supplies, ropes, rags, and hidden tools. Their eyes met Lydia's, a silent confirmation of the understanding they shared. No one would be left behind, no act taken without purpose. The three moved with quiet urgency, gliding between the shadows like specters, knowing the estate's secrets better than anyone else. They approached the quarters where the younger children of the plantation were housed. Most slept, oblivious to the night's unfolding chaos, their innocent faces serene amid the smoke and flickering light. Lydia lingered at the doorway, ensuring the path was clear, her mind mapping every possible exit. A soft knock on the door and a whispered voice Esther guided her movements. They would gather the children, move them safely to the woods beyond the fields, and ensure that the next day would not bring the same horrors they had endured. As they worked, Lydia's thoughts drifted briefly to the masters, still trapped inside the main house. The fire had forced them into the hallways, panic-stricken and vulnerable, while she and her allies remained invisible, precise, and deliberate. She did not relish their fear, but she recognized it as the consequence of years of cruelty. Every lash, every scream that had echoed through the plantation, had built toward this moment, a moment of accountability, measured and contained, where the powerless found their voice in action rather than words. Moving back toward the barn, Lydia noted the small fires she had lit earlier. They were controlled enough to contain the blaze, but chaotic enough to keep the masters disoriented. Smoke curled lazily against the night sky, and the flicker of flames cast long, eerie shadows across the fields. Every detail had been planned, every timing rehearsed, yet the unpredictability of human panic added a new layer of complexity. Marian gestured toward the fence line, indicating the route for the children to the edge of the property. Lydia nodded, approving. They would not leave tracks, would not be seen until they were safely hidden among the thick trees beyond the cleared fields. Every step was deliberate, a quiet battle of wits against the men who had never imagined themselves challenged in such a manner. A sudden shout echoed from the main house, breaking the tense silence. Lydia froze, listening intently. The masters were realizing, finally, that their control had slipped, that the house and its fields were no longer theirs to command unquestioned. The sound of hurried feet followed, and she understood instinctively they were trying to regain order, to recapture what had already been lost. But Lydia and her companions were already ahead, moving efficiently and silently. The children were her priority, the estate a secondary concern, yet every action had ripple effects. She understood that the fire, the shadows, and the chaos were tools, extensions of her will, precise in purpose. Each step, each whispered instruction, ensured that the night would end with the balance of power altered, if only slightly. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, Lydia stood at the edge of the woods, watching as the children disappeared into the safety of the trees. Her heart was steady, her mind sharp. The estate behind her still burned, and though the night was not yet over, she knew that the reckoning had begun. For the first time in years, those who had been silenced held the upper hand, and Lydia's resolve, tempered through suffering and loss, had guided the course of events. Tonight had been the first step, but the memory of every lash, every injustice, remained a fuel she could not ignore. And as the smoke rose into the early morning sky, Lydia allowed herself a small, controlled breath of relief. The battle for survival, for justice, and for the reclaiming of power had begun, and she would not falter. The estate might still stand, but its foundations built on cruelty and fear would never be the same again. The first light of morning filtered weakly through the thick fog that hung low over the fields, turning the plantation into a gray, silent expanse. Lydia paused at the edge of the woods, her eyes scanning the tree line where the children huddled quietly, still shaken but safe. The fire behind her had died down to embers, and smoke curled lazily into the sky, carrying with it the acrid scent of chaos. For the first time in her life, Lydia felt the heavy weight of hope pressing against the despair she had carried for so long. Marian and Esther moved beside her, silent as shadows. Their work the previous night had been precise, efficient, and mercilessly strategic, and now the aftermath was visible in every overturned chair, scorched doorway, and the disoriented groans of the masters stumbling through the estate. They had not killed indiscriminately. This was not a night of mindless rage. Each action had been calculated, measured to teach a lesson the oppressors would never forget. "You think they'll come after us?" Esther whispered, glancing at the children who clung to each other, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "They will," Lydia replied quietly, her voice steady, almost monotone. "But we have time. They are disoriented, uncoordinated. Panic has a way of blinding people, especially those who have always believed themselves untouchable." "I have elated," Marian frowned, her gaze returning to the embers of the burned barn. "And after they recover?" Lydia's eyes darkened. "Then we are ready for the next step. Tonight was the beginning. We've shown them that control is an illusion." Her hand rested on the hilt of the small dagger she carried not for the masters, but as a reminder to herself of the power she had fought to claim. The children had begun to move tentatively, following the path Lydia had marked through the woods. She kept close to the rear, her senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Every snapped twig, every distant murmur, made her tense, but no immediate danger appeared. It seemed the masters were too preoccupied with their own confusion, trying to re-establish authority over a house that had betrayed them in its silence. As they reached a clearing in the woods, Lydia finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The children were hidden among the trees, low bushes shielding them from view. She knelt to check on each of them, brushing dirt from their clothes and offering a quiet word of reassurance. "You are safe. You are stronger than they ever expected. Stay together, and you will get through this." Esther approached, carrying a bundle of cloth and food salvaged from the plantation kitchen. "It's not much," she said, distributing pieces of bread and dried fruit, "but it will hold them for now." "Enough," Lydia said firmly. "We move carefully, but with purpose. This is only the beginning. They've underestimated us for too long. Tonight we begin to reclaim what was stolen from us." The three women stood silently, watching as the children quietly ate and whispered among themselves, the fear on their faces slowly giving way to cautious curiosity. Every step of the previous night had been planned, yet seeing the results, living, breathing proof of survival brought a wave of emotion Lydia had learned to suppress over the years. Suddenly, the distant sound of horses' hooves broke through the morning stillness. Lydia stiffened, listening intently. The masters were regrouping, mobilizing. Panic had slowed them, but it would not last forever. They would come searching for the missing children, for Lydia and her companions, for any sign of rebellion. "They're coming," Lydia said, rising to her full height. "And we must be ready. We've done the impossible so far, but the fight is far from over. Every move we make now is a step toward freedom, toward justice for all who have suffered under this estate." Marian and Esther nodded, their eyes matching Lydia's resolve. They had been silent witnesses and active participants in the night's upheaval, and now they understood fully the magnitude of what had been set in motion. The plantation would never be the same. Its walls, once symbols of oppression, now bore witness to the cunning and courage of those who had been denied their voices. As the sound of hooves grew closer, Lydia led the children further into the woods, weaving paths through thick undergrowth, past hidden creeks and over fallen logs. Each step was deliberate, each decision informed by years of observation and survival. The masters might have power over the estate, but the forest was theirs, a labyrinth where the hunted could become the hunters, where the oppressed could strike with precision and patience. Hours passed as they navigated the dense woods. Lydia remained vigilant, listening for any signs of pursuit. When at last they reached a small, secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines, she allowed herself a small measure of relief. Here, they could rest, regroup, and plan their next move. The children settled on soft patches of moss and dry leaves, their exhaustion evident, but their spirits slightly buoyed by the successful escape. Lydia surveyed the area, taking mental notes of every vantage point, every potential threat. She understood that survival was more than just movement. It was strategy, patience, and the ability to anticipate the enemy's actions. The plantation might still stand, its owners still arrogant in their perceived control, but this day had shifted something fundamental. The balance of power had begun to tilt. "Rest for now," Lydia said softly to the children, kneeling beside the youngest. "Tonight, we continue. Tonight, we take back what was taken." As the sun began its slow ascent, scattering light through the dense canopy, Lydia's thoughts hardened into determination. The morning brought no triumph, only the promise of the next steps, the next careful strikes in a long struggle. Every scar, every act of defiance, had led to this moment. And though the path ahead would be fraught with danger, Lydia knew one unshakable truth. She and those she protected would not bow to fear again. In the distance, the faint sound of voices and the relentless clatter of hoofbeats reminded her of the coming reckoning. But for now, in this quiet, hidden sanctuary, the seeds of resilience and retribution had been firmly planted. And when night fell again, Lydia would ensure that the lessons of yesterday and today became legends, whispered in fear through the very halls that had long imprisoned them. The evening descended slowly, draping the forest in deep blues and grays that blurred the edges of reality. Lydia moved silently, the children close behind her, each footstep cushioned by layers of fallen pine needles. The faint rustle of the woods became a rhythm, a pulse she had learned to sync with during her years of survival. Every snapped twig or shifting leaf reminded her that the masters would not rest. They would come searching with lanterns and hounds, convinced that fear alone could reclaim what had slipped through their fingers. Marian walked ahead, her hand lightly touching the branches to signal the safest route. "We need to reach the old creek before dark," she whispered. "The water's fast, but it will mask our trail. They won't follow us through it easily." Esther, carrying a small bundle of food, glanced back at the children. "They're tired," she said softly. "If we push them too hard now, they'll collapse before we've even reached safety." Lydia shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "We cannot wait. Safety is not given, it is earned. Tonight we reclaim what was taken and ensure no one under my protection is vulnerable again. Every step now counts. Every decision shapes our future." As they moved, Lydia's mind wandered briefly to the estate they had left behind. The charred remnants of the barn, the overturned furniture, the shocked faces of the masters, it all felt unreal now. Yet, each memory sharpened her resolve. They had taken the first step in rewriting the rules of power, proving that even those deemed powerless could strike with precision, patience, and courage. The children, though weary, sensed the urgency and moved with careful determination. Their small hands gripped each other and the branches they used for support. Even the youngest had begun to understand the rhythm of survival, the silent language of the forest that Lydia had mastered over years of hardship. Hours passed, the shadows growing longer and deeper. Every sound, the distant hoot of an owl, the snap of a small animal in the underbrush, was analyzed and categorized. Lydia taught the children how to move without leaving traces, how to merge with darkness instead of fighting it, how to use the forest itself as a shield. Suddenly, the faint glimmer of lantern light flickered far in the distance. Lydia froze, listening intently. Voices whispered urgently. The masters were searching, but their panic made them careless. "Keep low," she hissed, lowering the children to the ground. "Do not make a sound. They will pass if we are still and unseen." The minutes stretched into an eternity as the search party moved closer, their shadows stretching across the forest floor like long, menacing fingers. Lydia's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every instinct, honed through years of oppression and observation, guided her movements. She signaled the children to stay perfectly still. The lanterns passed, their glow fading, leaving the forest silent once more. Lydia allowed herself a quiet exhale. "That was too close," she murmured, rising slowly. "We have to keep moving. They are relentless, but so are we. Tonight we prepare for the final steps. Tonight we make sure that their cruelty cannot continue unchecked." Marian glanced at her with a mix of admiration and concern. "They'll come again, Lydia. Stronger, faster, more determined." "They always do," Lydia replied. "But they underestimate us every single time. That is their mistake. Fear blinded them yesterday, confusion blinds them today, and tomorrow we strike with certainty." The old creek appeared before them, its dark water churning quietly, masking the sounds of movement beneath its surface. Lydia approached first, testing the current with a stick. "Strong but manageable," she said. "We cross carefully, every step deliberate, every child safe." They descended into the water, moving slowly, the cold biting but numbing enough to heighten their awareness. Lydia guided each child, making sure no one lost balance or drifted behind. Every step reinforced their bond, their trust in her leadership, and their collective determination to survive. Once across, they reached the other side, the forest opening slightly to a patch of higher ground. Lydia paused, letting the children rest, their small faces reflecting relief and exhaustion in equal measure. "We are not safe yet," she reminded them, "but we have gained ground. Every night, every step, every careful decision is moving us closer to freedom, and we will not falter. We cannot." As night deepened, Lydia led them further into the forest, moving toward a hidden path she had identified years before, a route that would take them beyond the immediate reach of the estate. She knew the master's obsession would drive them recklessly, giving Lydia and the children an advantage they could not afford to waste. The forest embraced them, shadows becoming allies instead of threats, every rustle of leaves a signal of their resilience. In the distance, faint noises of pursuit reminded her that the fight was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. They had survived the first tests, outsmarted their oppressors, and taken control of their destiny. Tonight, Lydia's determination burned brighter than the faint moonlight, illuminating the path forward. And as the children followed her into the deeper darkness, they carried with them the first sparks of hope, a hope forged from courage, cunning, and the unyielding will to reclaim lives that had been stolen for far too long. The forest seemed to whisper in quiet approval, as if even the trees acknowledged that a new chapter had begun. And in the stillness, Lydia knew that their journey, though perilous, was far from futile. Each careful step, each act of strategy, was a promise that oppression would meet its reckoning, that cruelty would not endure, and that survival, no matter how precarious, was theirs to claim. By dawn, the forest would witness more than just movement. It would witness the emergence of strength, resilience, and a rebellion tempered by patience, precision, and the unshakable determination of those who refused to be broken. The morning fog clung to the edges of the forest, weaving through the trees like a living thing. Lydia's group moved cautiously, each footstep muffled by layers of moss and fallen leaves. Their night crossing of the creek had given them precious distance from the estate, but Lydia knew better than to trust that the danger had passed. The master's pursuit was relentless, and their anger at being outwitted would make them even more dangerous. The children, though weary, followed her without complaint. Each had begun to understand the unspoken rhythm of survival, when to move, when to pause, when silence could protect them better than speed. They trusted her completely, and Lydia felt the weight of that trust, knowing that one misstep could shatter the fragile safety she had carved for them. Marian's eyes scanned the forest ahead. "There's a ridge up there," she whispered. "If we can reach it, we'll have a vantage point to see if they're still following." "Good," Lydia replied, her voice low but steady. "We move carefully, no sudden noises, no stray movements. Every step is part of the plan." As they climbed, the mist began to lift, revealing the distant outlines of the estate in the valley below. Smoke still lingered over the charred remnants of the barn, a stark reminder of their defiance. Lydia's heart tightened at the sight, but she pushed the feeling aside. Emotions could not cloud her judgment. Strategy and caution had to lead. The ridge offered a clear view, and Lydia crouched behind a cluster of evergreens, studying the landscape. Faint tracks marked the ground below, showing that the masters had indeed pursued them but were now regrouping. She turned to the children. "They are close, but they do not see us. This is our moment to set the next step in motion." Esther held the youngest child's hand tightly. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. Lydia's eyes scanned the paths below, noting where the pursuers were concentrated and where their attention was distracted by the burned estate. "We lead them into the thicket," she said. "The dense undergrowth will slow them, split their forces, and give us an advantage. We do not fight with brute force, we fight with strategy." The group moved with renewed purpose, slipping through hidden paths that Lydia had memorized from her childhood and the secret knowledge she had gathered over years of observation. The forest became a labyrinth, every turn a calculated step designed to disorient the masters and protect the children. Suddenly, a snapping branch echoed from the valley below. Lydia froze, signaling the children to halt. The pursuers had spotted movement. Lanterns swung, casting harsh light that sliced through the fog, but the group was already concealed by the thick brush. The moment demanded precision. Any mistake could cost them their freedom or worse. "Spread out just enough," Lydia instructed, "but stay within sight. When they enter the thicket, we will move swiftly along the paths they cannot see." The masters, confident in their numbers, advanced without caution, stepping into the dense undergrowth. Their progress slowed immediately. Branches snagged clothing, roots tripped the hasty, and the fog obscured every misstep. Lydia watched, noting each falter, each hesitant glance, understanding that their overconfidence was becoming their undoing. "Now," she whispered, and the group moved in perfect synchrony, guiding themselves along hidden trails, slipping behind natural barriers, and staying just beyond the pursuers' reach. The forest, familiar and forgiving to them, became an invisible fortress. Hours passed in this tense game of cat and mouse. The master's frustration mounted, their shouts echoing through the trees, but Lydia's leadership kept the children calm and focused. Each successful maneuver reinforced their confidence. They were not merely running, they were reclaiming control, proving that cunning and courage could outmatch oppression and cruelty. As the day wore on, Lydia led them to a secluded clearing, far from the estate and the paths the masters would likely patrol. She allowed the children a moment to rest, to eat, and to regain strength. "We are not safe yet," she reminded them, "but we have gained something far more important, momentum. They do not know where we are, and we can choose the next step of this journey." Marion nodded, her face reflecting both relief and determination. "They will regroup, but we are ready. Every move has been a lesson for them. They underestimated us at every turn, and that is their greatest mistake." Lydia's gaze swept over the children, seeing courage mirrored in their eyes. "We move forward, together," she said, "and nothing they do can take that from us. Not fear, not threats, not even their greed or cruelty. We have the forest, our wits, and each other. That is more than enough." Night fell, wrapping the clearing in shadows. Lydia and her small company prepared for another night's vigilance, their bodies tired but their spirits unbroken. Every sound of the forest, every flicker of moonlight through the trees, reminded them that freedom was not given, it was seized, step by careful step. In that quiet, darkened clearing, Lydia allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. They had survived pursuit, navigated treacherous terrain, and learned the true power of strategy and solidarity. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one truth was undeniable. Those who had sought to control them would no longer dictate their fate. The forest held its breath, the night cradling their resilience, as Lydia's group settled for the temporary safety the clearing offered. They were not merely surviving, they were planning, calculating, and reclaiming a sense of power long denied to them. And somewhere in the distance, the first hints of dawn promised the next chapter of their relentless journey toward freedom. The sun rose slowly over the dense forest, filtering through the canopy in golden beams that danced on the undergrowth. Lydia watched from the crest of a small hill, her eyes tracing the winding paths they had navigated in the past days. The children were busy gathering water from a nearby stream and inspecting the clearing for supplies, their faces brightened by a rare sense of safety. For the first time in weeks, the weight of constant fear lifted just enough for them to breathe freely, if only for a moment. The estate below, now a distant memory, seemed smaller from this height. The smoke from the burned barn had long dissipated, leaving only scorched earth and scattered debris. Lydia had seen the master's pursuit falter in the maze of the forest, their arrogance meeting its match against strategy, patience, and the indomitable will of those they sought to control. Their cries and shouts had faded, replaced by the wind rustling through the trees, a reminder that nature itself had become an ally to those who knew how to move within it. Lydia thought of the children, their small hands clutching tools they had learned to wield with care, their young minds absorbing lessons of caution, observation, and courage. Each one was a living testament to survival, to the power of cleverness over brute strength, and to the unyielding determination of a mother who refused to see her lineage crushed under oppression. She had not only kept them alive, but had taught them resilience, the kind that would endure long after this forest had claimed them as its own. Night after night, the forest had concealed them, protected them, and given them a vantage point the masters could never anticipate. Lydia had become both guide and guardian, her intellect and calm decisiveness turning every potential threat into a learning opportunity. Every falter by the pursuers had reinforced a simple truth. Underestimating the hunted was the gravest of mistakes. Yet freedom was not a singular event, but a continuum. Lydia knew they would need to move again, to stay ahead of those who sought to reclaim control. But for now, in this quiet dawn, there was triumph in the air. The children laughed softly, chasing each other in a circle, their voices light but full of a strength that had been forged in adversity. Lydia allowed herself to feel a rare peace, knowing that the skills, courage, and solidarity she had nurtured would carry them far beyond these woods. She reflected on the journey so far, every step taken with care, every path navigated with patience, every lesson learned through observation and strategy. The masters who had tried to impose their will had underestimated the depth of human resourcefulness and the bond that forms when lives are intertwined by shared struggle. Lydia had not merely survived, she had turned the tables, reshaped the rules, and claimed agency where there had been none. As the morning sun rose higher, painting the forest in vibrant hues of green and gold, Lydia gathered the children around her. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice steady but warm. "We have proven that even in the darkest moments, courage and cleverness can guide us. We have seen that oppression is never absolute when we move together, when we watch, when we plan, and when we trust each other. The children nodded, understanding more than their years suggested. Each one had glimpsed the consequences of cruelty and the strength required to survive it. They carried in their hearts not just the memory of fear, but the memory of triumph, of moments where quick thinking and unwavering resolve had saved them from despair. Lydia looked toward the horizon, where the first hints of civilization could be seen in the distance, though far enough away to remain a challenge to reach. Every choice they would make from this point forward would be informed by the lessons of the forest: patience, strategy, and the unshakable belief that no one could dictate their fate if they held to one another. In that quiet clearing, with the wind through the trees and the children's laughter mingling with the song of birds, Lydia allowed herself to hope. The pursuit might resume, dangers might arise, and freedom might still be elusive in its final form. But they had claimed something far more valuable: control over their own destiny, a proof that intellect and courage could stand against oppression. The forest, witness to their trials, seemed to exhale with them, its leaves rustling in harmony with the renewed sense of agency Lydia felt. And though the world outside would remain fraught with challenges, one truth was undeniable: the hunted had become the strategist, the mother had become the protector, and their lineage, strong, smart, and unyielding, would continue forward, unbroken. The sun fully emerged, casting light over the group, illuminating the determination in Lydia's eyes and the resilience in the children's faces. It was a beginning, not an end, a moment of fragile peace, but one that carried the weight of victory. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lydia allowed herself to imagine a future where fear did not rule, where courage and wisdom guided every step, and where the bonds forged in the darkest nights became the foundation of a new life.